So a few weeks ago, a few friends of mine came to visit, some wonderful friends, and brought me this gift, which is a super quilt in a box by the Vermont Flannel Company. It is full of over 900 4-inch by 4-inch squares of flannel. I just couldn't wait to share it with you. Before we get started on the tutorial, my name is Chris O'Neill from Sew the Distance. Thank you for joining me. So we will take a peek at this, and I will also give you a lot of tips on how to work with flannel and see if we can make something beautiful out of it. So let's get started. So when you open the box, you get all of these fabrics, and there are 6 different kinds or different prints. Now, when you order the box, it is random on which print you're going to get, so you might not get ones exactly like this. You also get a Quilt in a Box instruction booklet. It's good, but I don't know, it's just extremely basic. It's not very detailed, but it does give you the sizes on the back and how many you need and all of that. However, we're going to adjust the seam allowance, so we will have to adjust these sizes too. So I'm going to set this aside. And like I said, there are 6 different fabrics. On the top of the box, I'll put a picture here, it does have the 6 fabrics that are inside taped onto it. If you're familiar with the Vermont Flannel Company, you know how extremely soft their flannel is. It's just incredible. It's 100% cotton. It's not treated or anything like that. And it is just super duper soft. Now with any flannel, there is a nap or a side that's fuzzier. However, with this flannel, it's really hard to tell which is which. So I just kind of went with it with this quilt. I'm sure I have some that are considered upside down, but you know what, I'm just gonna go with it. Also, something else to consider with flannel is it does fray, and you can see that here, how this is fraying a little bit. So that's why we're gonna make a bigger seam allowance with this quilt. So I'm gonna take out a bunch and show you my next step with this project. And I'm just gonna take a few stacks out here. Okay, so we have our 6 fabrics, or 6 prints, I should say. I'm going to randomize these by putting them together to make 2 patches. One thing about this fabric is I think it was cut on a die, but I don't think anybody really paid attention necessarily to the stretch or the bias of this. And some aren't exactly 4-inch by 4-inch. So that's important as we get started on this. Let me see if I can find a good example. This one's pretty good, but you can't see it on camera. Let me get 2 contrasting fabrics. Here we go. Okay, you can see how that purple is much bigger than that blue and red print. To fix this, or to help with this at least, what I'm going to do is find a spot that is about the right size on one side and line it up as best as I can. And I'm not going to worry about these edges that don't line up right now. I'm just going to put a pin in this so I know that I'm going to sew on this side, the side I'm calling straight and even. And I'm just going to place a pin in there. And that's just a reminder of where I need to sew and how I need to sew it. I want to make a quilt that's about 66 by 66 or thereabout. I'm going to need 400 of these squares. So I'm going to get started putting them in sets of 2. Now if you're doing the math, you're probably like, that's not right, because we are going to cut these down because everything is kind of uneven. So bear with me as we go through that. To randomize this, I'm going to take one of these stacks and I'm going to match it with each one of these fabrics, put it back, take another stack, match it with all these fabrics. That's going to give me a nice random pattern. I'm just going to keep going like that. It's just a system. Okay, I have all 400 pieces or 200 sets pinned and ready to go on these trays, and I'm going to start sewing. But before I do, I'm going to adjust some settings on my machine. So let me show you what I'm going to do. So to set up your machine for this project, you're going to use a wider seam allowance. And the way I did that with my Janome, and yours may be different, but I put on my walking foot, and definitely use a walking foot if you have one. It'll help with the fabric feeding through your machine evenly because there is some stretch to it. I also put on my attachment that has my 1/4-inch flange, so it's like I don't know, a stop for your fabric that I have. But instead of moving my needle over so I get a 1/4 inch, I'm going to leave it where it is, and that's going to give me a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So you're going to sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance for this project. I know it's weird, but it'll give us a lot of space because there is a lot of fraying that comes along with flannel fabric. I'm also going to change my stitch length from 2.4, which is what I usually use, and I'm going to turn it down to 2. You could even go a little smaller if you want a little shorter. That's just going to help with those stitches that they're going to be nice and tight, but you don't want them too tight that they're going to pucker. And then a neutral thread. I also pre-wound some bobbins because I know I'm going to be using a lot, and I'm just all ready to go. I also put in a new needle, so I'm good to go with that as well. So I just grabbed a handful to show you how to do this. I'm not going to bore you and show you all 200. We'll take it easy on you a little bit there. So I'm just going to take one and make sure it is lined up on one side as best as possible. I'm going to lift this and I'm going to start stitching. And I'm going to chain piece, meaning that I'm going to put one in right after the other, like this, and then I'll cut them apart when I'm done getting a bunch done. Taking all the 2 patches that I sewed together, I'm using this clover cutting tool to clip apart the chain pieces, and I'm going to do that to all of them. So these are all clipped apart, and like I said before, you can really see how uneven they are on the one side, but I tried to keep this side as even as possible, and that's just going to help us with the next steps. So we're going to set the seams for all of these blocks. I have them all here, all clipped apart. And to do that, I'm going to take my iron and just place it right down onto that seam. That's going to relax those fibers. So then I'm going to open this and open my seams. Now, if you watch my videos regularly, you know I like to press to the side, but in this case, because there is so much bulk, I am going to open the seam. And it opens pretty easily, especially because we have that larger seam allowance in there. I'm just going to press it. And I'm going to do that to all 200 of these sets. Once we have these all pressed, I'm going to put them together into 4 patches. And again, I'm going to take that seam that I kept nice and straight or lined up, and I'm going to match them up. And I'm worried about where this intersection is. You know, I'm not too stressed, but it is a place where you might notice if they don't come together, and it's also going to help us when we cut things down and make it all square and wonderful, which we're going to do in the next step. So I'm going to line those 2 seams up. And to do that, you can use a pin by placing your pin in to that seam. So it comes through at the spot, and you're going to do that the distance of your seam allowance. And that's going to allow for that to line up. After that, you just put in some pins around it. That way we know that middle is straight and ready to go. And you can even check it, just double check it and make sure. You want to use some pins because this is stretchy. Again, we don't know how it was cut, so you do want to use some pins. You're going to sew right along that. You're going to do that to all of them. Okay, so now that we have all of our 4 patches made, we are going to cut them down to even them up and to get a consistent size, especially because these are so wonky. So what we're going to do is take a ruler. So it just has to be 7 inches or bigger because we're going to trim this down to a 7-inch block. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to lay our block down on a mat, and I like to use the back side of the mat because I don't want to get confused or distracted by any of the numbers on the other side. So I just turn a mat over, and I'm going to line up half of 7, which is 3.5. So I'm going to line up my 3.5 line here and my 3.5 line here. So my 7-inch block is here. You can see the 7s, and I'm just going to line that half mark right on that seam, and I'm going to trim around it, holding the ruler nice and steady and with a really sharp rotary cutter blade, a new blade's in. And I'm going to turn this, so this was where the corner was that I just trimmed. So I trimmed this side and this side. I'm going to take this corner, I'm going to flip it to this corner. So I know these sides are right. I'm going to line my 7-inch here and 7-inch here, and you can see I'm right on the 3.5-inch up here when I look. And I'm going to just make sure that goes all the way across, following that seam line. And, oops, didn't get that. There we go. Okay, so that's how you square it up. I'll show you again with another one. Actually, we're going to hold that one off because I want to show you something with that one. All right, here's another one. And I know it's distracting with the lines in the plaid. That can be really tough. Do your best with it. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, I line that up, holding down. So I lined up my 3.5 and my 3.5 right on that sewn line, those seams. In my 4 patch, I'm holding it nice and tight. I'm cutting around. I'm going to take this upper right hand corner. I'm going to flip it to the bottom left because I know these two sides are straight, so I can line them right up on my 7-inch mark. Hold it nice and tight. You can check to make sure that you're all lined up, which I am. Pull those away and put it in your pile of done. So there's 100 of these blocks, of course. Now that we started with 400 of the small squares, we made 2 patches, which gave us 200. Now we're down to 100 of the 4 patches. So I wanted to talk briefly about this one because my points do not line up exactly here. So what I'm going to do is still square it up. I'm not going to rip it out. I'm going to still line up my 3.5 and 3.5, but you can see that the line doesn't quite go. So I'm just going to split the difference a little bit, just a tiny bit, just a hair, and line it up as best as I can, making sure that it is still straight. And cut my sides. Take my upper right-hand corner here, put it to the bottom left-hand corner, line it up, and there you have it. That's how you get these to the 7-inch by 7-inch mark. And you're going to do that with all of these. Now once you have them all done, you have these wonderful 4 patches that are cut down to your 7 by 7-inch size. And we're going to now join them together. So to do this, I'm just going to pick up a few and I'm just going to make sure that 2 patterns aren't touching. So I wouldn't do necessarily this, although it's not a huge deal if that happens. But I'm just going to make sure that the 2 patterns aren't touching. And I'm going to sew these 2 together, just like I did before, pinning really well at that seam, but everything should line up, which it does. But I'm gonna still pin because it is, wonky. It can get really wonky and out of square pretty easily since we don't know how it was cut. So I'm gonna pin that. Making sure it's lined up. This is a little off. I'm gonna take this out. Go this way a little bit. And just pin those really well. Just like that. And I'm going to sew right along here, taking the pins out as I sew. And through the magic of YouTube, I made one ahead of time. I have one here done. So once you have a bunch of these done, you can then put them together the exact same way. So we're basically making a 16 patch, a giant 16 patch. You're going to do that with all of these. Okay, so then I would sew right along this, and I'm actually going to throw a few more pins in here just to stabilize it. So once you're finished making all of your 16 patches, now's the time that we're going to put these into rows, and we're going to make 5 rows of 5. So to put these into rows, there's a few tricks that I like to use, and one of them involves these clips. I like to use the jumbo clips, and I'll put a link below to them. I get them on Amazon. I haven't found them anywhere else, but they're just like the Clover clips, but bigger. And I use them to distribute the weight before I pin these pieces together. And it just helps because this is getting really heavy as we sew along. And it really becomes important when we sew those rows to each other. So I'm just going to take 5, put them together, try my best not to have patterns matching. It doesn't always work, but I try, and make my 5 rows. But before we do that, I do want to mention cleaning your machine. So every time that the bobbin ran out, I would clean my machine, and that's going to happen probably 3 times during this entire process. And it gets really built up in there, so it's really important that you do that. This is fuzzy fabric, and it just comes apart. You can see here how much gunk I got out. That's just one cleaning. You'll also want to clean your rotary blade too, because it gets all gummed up with the little tiny pieces of fiber that fly everywhere. And actually, you're going to have to clean your entire room probably by the end of this entire quilt. So let's sew these rows together and finish up this quilt. Okay, so I have 5 of these rows all sewn together into strips. Now I'm going to sew the rows to each other to finish up our 600 patch quilt. So I'm going to do the exact same thing that I did before. I'm going to clip the ends and pin, 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 tons of pins to keep this all level. Sew 2 rows together and then 2 more rows together, then put those together and finally put that last row on. And we're going to be finished with this quilt top. So let's go. I can't believe it, but it is finished. This entire thing is finished. It is so heavy, but it is great. It's very, very scrappy. As much as I tried to make sure patterns were next to each other, of course it happened, but I kind of like it. It's very cabinish, very woodsy-like. I just love it. It's super soft, super heavy, and that's just the quilt top. So my question for you is, how do I finish this? I'd love to hear from you what you think. I can't decide if I want to put a batting in here, maybe a flannel back, maybe not. Maybe I'll use a sheet. I'm not sure if I should quilt it or tie it or what. So please give me your opinion on what you would do with this. It's a great quilt. I do want to finish it, and I just can't wait to snuggle up with it this winter. If you're interested in buying one of these kits, I'll put a link below in the first comment and in the description. Please know I'm not sponsored or anything by this company. This is just something I liked and something I wanted to try, especially since my friends gave me the gift of this box. Now I'm told that the Super Quilt in a Box is only available at the retail stores, but on the Vermont Flannel Company's website, you can get a smaller box, I think that has like 600 pieces in it or something like that. And I think it's under $40. You can also buy yardage on their website. And of course, after I made this, I found out that you can buy pieced panels of little squares like this too. So anyway, there's lots of options out there, or you can just go and buy flannel, which would work too. And then you have a little bit more control over what your fabric colors are and stuff like that. I do have about 300 pieces left. I don't know what I'm gonna do with them. One thing I know some people are gonna comment on is that the plaids aren't necessarily straight. I really didn't worry about that. If you are concerned about that, you might want to take each block and cut it out so you don't have to square it up and you don't have to worry about that. But still, remember, it's very, very stretchy. I hope you have a good day. I hope you take some time to sew, and I'll see you soon. Bye.